Well, some developing news out of Chicago as we move to the Midwest. Thousands of Occupy protesters gathering as we speak ahead of this weekend's NATO summit. The crowd's expected to get even larger by the time the summit actually gets underway, which will be this Sunday. The pictures of these protesters surely at the top of the headlines right now. However, the most consequential aspect of what's going on is what they're protesting about. Massive spending on foreign wars with no end. Money that they believe, and I agree with them, we better used here at home. 61 NATO heads of state and our allies arrive in the Windy City this weekend, including, and this is a rare event, the president of Pakistan. You can be sure that his area of the world will be the hot topic of conversation through the weekend, at least one of them. I want to get to Mike Barrett, who is the CEO of Diligent Innovations. It's a consulting firm. His background includes service as the director of strategy for the White House Homeland Security Council under President Bush. If you were the chair of that meeting, convening that meeting of 61, Mike, what would be the #1 problem that you would want to try to resolve in the room, and what would be the greatest asset you would have to do it, and what would be the greatest barrier?
Sure. Well, the biggest challenge right now for NATO is that they are needing to respond to their domestic constituencies who basically, as we've talked about, want to pull out. Everybody thinks that if you're going to try to really fix Afghanistan, it's going to take billions and billions of dollars and decades to do it. And so, from the U.S. perspective, it looks like, we've decided for whatever reasons we're going to stay, but we're only going to stay past the election. We'll pull out in 2014, and we're also going to stay for a decade after that at some lower level, and we're going to basically foot the bill ourselves. So I think the biggest challenge for the U.S. is going to be getting other people to agree, NATO members or not, that they're actually willing to help support the stabilization effort, right, which most people don't have much confidence in, and then also actually collecting that money, because the big challenge is going to be a lot of people will pledge it and then not deliver on it. And of course, obviously, Europe right now is in economic disarray. They've got other issues they've got to worry about.
So is this meeting this weekend a sales pitch from the United States to the NATO nations trying to basically syndicate the financing costs of our plans over the next decade in that country?
Basically, yes. I mean, most of this stuff tries to, they try to hash it out in advance. So these things, it's more about the ceremony than it is about the actual conversations. But yeah, what you've got is 3 separate competing interests. So each country has, a general desire for stability and peace in Afghanistan. I think everybody would love to have that as an outcome. Then, of course, they have their domestic constituencies, which for the most part are saying, let's get out. We're not seeing any return on our previous investment, much less do we want to make any more investment. And then the U.S. is standing there saying, well, look, this is kind of the cost of empire. It's the burden of empire. We feel that we can't just cut and run. We got to stay a little while longer, but we can't stay alone. So you guys got to hang in there with us, which has actually been, to some degree, has been working with the NATO allies because of the history of NATO. Although you'll see, because of the recent change in the French government, that the French troops are going to pull out earlier. And I think as they head to the door, that's really going to put a lot of pressure on some of the other countries in NATO to say, hey, we got to really get out of there. We can do a little more training and equipping. Maybe we'll do some out-of-country training, but we're really not going to stay on the ground and putting our troops at risk, because their domestic public in Europe is just not going to support it.
Which ultimately then is going to put whoever the President of the United States is and the Congress under that much more pressure by virtue of our isolation. I'm interested in your perspective, while I've got you, on Musharraf and Pakistan in general. No secret at this point that really has become the locus of the unknown, the locus of the sort of organizing or disorganizing of whatever the sort of terrorist resistance is, along with places like Yemen. What, if anything, could NATO achieve with Pakistan in the context of this weekend, or in the context of any diplomacy over the next 12 months?
Well, Pakistan is clearly one of the 2 major issues involving Afghanistan. Ironically, the other one is Iran. So, of course, to say that we're in Afghanistan because Iran's on one side and Pakistan's on the other, we're not willing to say that publicly, but that's kind of the reality. The challenges with Pakistan are we've got to get to some level of peaceful accord with the senior leaders in the intelligence services and in the government and in the military, because unfortunately, Pakistan has a huge safe haven for all sorts of militants that are anti-U.S. and anti-Western, and they've got nuclear weapons. And so it's one of these things where you can't just give up on Pakistan itself. One of the things that I've said, and I think is often lost in the debate, is we're really kind of down to 2 points, right? One is to cut and run, to just leave Afghanistan, say that will give us a chance to regroup and to pull ourselves back and to be prepared if we needed to go into Pakistan to secure the loose nukes, be prepared if we end up having to go into Iran and dealing with issues there between Iran and Israel and the nuclear program. Or the other option is to really stay in Afghanistan and to say we need the base, we need the footprint, we need the logistics, we need the intelligence supports that we get from there. But the problem, of course, is that we really haven't led on this issue. So the president, hadn't talked about Afghanistan in a year until he gave a speech about a week ago. We haven't seen the National Security Advisor out front. We don't see the military out there. So we don't have a clear policy for what we want. We're just going to stay about 12 months.
And that lack of clarity is one of the things that is perhaps the most frustrating for the electorate and the most difficult for anybody to even make decisions around. Mike, thank you for your insight going into the meetings. Of course, we will keep everybody appraised of whatever happens through those meetings, and we'll continue that into next week. I do want to take a moment.